here we go, getting right into this one. It's a new Gaslands car build. I've found a group to game with, so I'm finally getting some new cars built. We have a Cobra this time, and I'm starting off with taking the paint off. I think this is a Shelby Cobra. Forgive me if I'm butchering the name there. But using a little clean strip to take the paint off. I started out with this little plastic cup. I was going to think that might control the stuff, but it ended up I needed a wider area, so I just dumped it into this little tin here and soaked it for a while and let it soak. And it didn't work too well. I think I'm going to look for something different next time, but I just kind of set it aside and went into my bin of misfit scrap toys, bits, stuff, and started looking for different types of guns. I knew I wanted a gun with this one, and so I have a lot to choose from. There's some bullets and guns and a lot of really neat texture, actually, once I started diving into this this bin, little gas can like things and random hands that could be kind of fun for, some car builds, and already nice looking, kind of like just a lot of guns and texture, as you can see that I'm pulling out here. Mostly guns. There were a couple other things that kind of stuck out, but mostly it's kind of guns and texture and some Thundercats and more guns. But this one actually could be a really neat texture. That gun, I think, is the gun that I ended up using for this build. But at that time, I really wasn't sure what we were going to use, and that looked really kind of cool. A little loudspeaker and just more random Boba Fett backpack type Star Wars stuff. Possible hood ornament that I found right there. Some claws for Wolverine. Those are actually G.I. Joe claws. Bow from Lord of the Rings, sword from Lord of the Rings, just some neat textures. You can see that it didn't stop. I found a lot of inspiration here. And this one may show up in another build, but I didn't use it in this build. I think the snake could be kind of fun to stick out of a hood of a car. But yeah, Gears of War figure gun, another G.I. Joe piece, some tubes, and we pretty much got what I needed there. And so I had a lot of inspiration to go on, and so I started taking a brush. You can see that it didn't take all the paint out, so I took a Dremel with a wire brush. And at about this time, I realized, what am I thinking? Why am I doing the front of the car? Because I had a plan for that. And so I just started focusing on the back of the car after that. You can see even the bottom of the car is white. The clean strip just did not work with this paint, and so it loosened it up enough, I guess, because this wire brush, it was really quick to kind of get it done. And I liked the brush steel look once this was over, but ended up painting over it. May do one eventually with the brush steel, because I think it could be kind of fun. We're wearing respirators while we're doing this, and glasses and goggles and a lot of safety stuff. Now I'm going to take a hacksaw, because I had the idea of cutting the front of this car off and having that where the gun and the passenger is going to be sitting. And so a hacksaw and a specific blade cutting for metal. I think if you want to do this, you get the blades that are meant for metal. I think the teeth count is what really counts. Like the metal is a finer tooth count. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not 100% sure, but make sure that your hacksaw blade is rated to cut metal, because there's different types of blades depending on the tooth count. And you can see here, I'm just kind of rotating it as I go and just cutting through, rotating it, cutting through and rotating it again. And this is the last rotation. By this time, I ended up putting on gloves because there were shards of metal, and my hand was getting really close to the hacksaw, so I decided to kind of play it safe. And there it goes. The hood of the car stays, the back of the car goes. You can see it is kind of there are some burrs, so I had to take it to a little grinding wheel and kind of grind it off there. You can see that steel, that it's a really nice look to the steel, but I ended up not going with that. And there's the line of the car. I really liked the lines. After I got that hood off, it just, something was really cool about it. So I've got a full front of the car to play with, throwing guns and a figure and passenger in that, and then we'll get a driver in. And the engine, I actually have an idea of sticking it out the back. But first, to the driver, you can see I had a Caesar Miniatures Goblin, and I cut him in half, and I cut his arms off because his arms were kind of crossed a little bit. They weren't going to sit right. And I knew that I was going to go ahead and put him in the car a little bit differently. So I cut the arms off, cut the legs off. You can see there he is sitting in there, happy as can be, just enjoying his time on life. But he needs some arms. And so we're going to make some arms here for him. Just kind of doing a test fit to see how he's going to look, if I need to cut any more off of him or anything like that. But there's the products that I'm using next. I got a little pin vise and some super glue and some wire and a razor, and cutting a flat part on the shoulder. So you want to cut it flush and flat because you want to have something to drill into. So you want to get it kind of flat. And it's just a torso and a head right now, but we're going to make the arms. And so here's the little pin vise where it comes in handy. You got to be very careful. I've poked myself many times when doing this, but a little pin vise, kind of drive it in there. And some 24 gauge aluminum wire, just any little wire you get at a craft store, the jewelry aisle. Run down that aisle, pick up some of this wire because it comes in handy. And this wire, you double wrap it, and it's right about the size you might need for his arms. And so a little bit of super glue, and you just kind of glue that right into that socket that you drilled and let it cure. And kind of just set it aside and don't even touch it. Right there. And as that's drying, I'm kind of getting the second arm, his right arm, going. As you can see, glue came out a little faster than expected, but there we go. It goes right in to there. And he's got two arms. And then from there, we're able to bend the arms however we want, in any position we want. And then I use some epoxy putty to sculpt the new arms. And actually, I didn't sculpt the arms. I actually sculpted sleeves on this little guy. It's time's passed a little bit, and so we've got a dry now, and so I'm able to bend these arms forward so that it looks like he's actually touching the steering wheel. And so I knew that the arms were too long at this point, and so I'm kind of just getting a gauge of where I need to cut the arms, how deep we want to cut those. And so I'm just marking with a Sharpie and just roughly eyeing it. Not super precise, but I wanted to kind of get just a rough idea of where we need to go there. And in order to paint him and to sculpt him, I'm going to need to not hold him as I'm painting him or sculpting him. You know, it's easier to put him on a base. So I'm coming under and just using the same trick that I used. A little bit of a wire and just kind of bend it over and glue it up into that hole that you made in the bottom of his torso. And this is kind of how I paint a lot of my miniatures. I just kind of base them onto something. There he is. He's getting a little happier. He's got that smile now. He knows that I'm going to take care of him. I'm not going to leave him armless. He's got a little hat. I didn't notice that he had that little hat, but until I filmed it. So yeah, just a normal cork. I bought like a pack of corks at like a craft store, and so we throw those on, and this is what they call a Procreate putty. And so I'm kind of mixing some of this stuff up, and this stuff is kind of my go-to putty for when I do clothes. Kind of like what I'm going to be doing on this driver here. I'm going to make him like this big kind of hooded jacket. And so it's really easy stuff to work with in terms of making jackets. You just kind of cut it, and you can see it's almost like a taffy consistency. So the hardest part is getting it to stick down. And once you get it to stick down, you can kind of rub it and move it around so that it drapes the way you want it. And so I'm just kind of messing around with it here. We've got one arm on, and we want the other arm on. And as you get close to the shoulder, you see there's like some bends and folds. I'm not too worried about that because of the way that I build these. They the main part of his coat is going to cover that up. As you can see right here, I just kind of took a square and I cut the middle in the square and just made like a big hole. You slip it over his head, and just the way that you drape it, you can see that it just looks like it just flows right over the shoulders and kind of works perfectly. Sometimes this stuff can get a little too sticky and it sticks to your tools, so you get a little Vaseline, like a petroleum jelly, and just kind of rub just a little tiny bit of that on the tool, and then it won't stick to the putty. And you're able to kind of punch it down, and there he is, completed. It's not, the most stylish of attire, but this guy's driving in a hacked up Cobra in Gaslands, so he's not most stylish at all. And so after we get these guys ready, it's time to paint. And so I skipped some of the painting, but this is a really neat Rust-Oleum that I found. It's like a pitted metal. You can see right there the way that it goes on. It's smooth textured, but when you look at it, it looks like it's kind of like this hammered kind of pitted metal. So it creates a neat color for a Gaslands car, at least in my opinion. And so you can see that we've got everything painted. I've skipped ahead there. Everything's painted, and I've got some 5-minute epoxy making that up and adding the epoxy to the bottom of the car. And I'm a little bit generous, hoping that some of that epoxy will seep into the wheels and lock the wheels in place. And there is our little driver after his jacket and paint and clothes, and he is ready to rock and roll. And it's time to add the hood of the car. And again, you can see I'm kind of getting it under there and almost kind of touching the side of the wheel wells, hoping to lock those wheels up so they won't roll around during the game. And at this time, I kind of ran out of the super glue, or the epoxy, and was a little bit, I like to put a little bit more on the bottom of the car usually, but this one I wasn't able to. Resin cast of an engine. It's just like a normal Hot Wheel engine that I made a resin cast out of, and this piece never really made it into the build. I just didn't really like it, but here's where the gun is going to be sitting. Got the engine in the back, the gun right there. I'm doing one last fit to make sure I have everything where I need before I epoxy it in. And once again, 5-minute epoxy. We'll throw it on the engine, throw it on the guns, and we'll add the passenger. Throw that on the engine, and I had to cut the tire. There was a tire, like a spare tire out in the back of that. So I cut that out, and I had to actually hold that engine in there a little bit just so that it wouldn't rock. It was it didn't fit there snug. I had to hold it until the epoxy cured enough that it wouldn't move. And there's our gun and the gunner. Gunny's going to sit right next to the gun up front there, kneeling down in front of the driver. Just thought that was kind of a fun place to add the driver there, right there. And everything is squeezed in, and we just kind of wait for the epoxy to dry, and there's the end product. You can see the driver more than a lot of the other cars that I actually did. This driver is pretty prominent. But overall, kind of a fun build. I got a little sloppy on